Well, hello plant lovers, it is Matthew in Melbourne welcoming you to my channel. Thanks for finding me in this crowded world of YouTube videos because I try to grow here in Melbourne, Australia, cold, cool, intermediate orchids without any equipment. So greenhouses or humidifiers or grow lights, really just me and them struggling to find our path together inside, outside or not at all. So plant lovers of the world, if that sounds like your no nonsense type of growing, do hit subscribe. I post every week on a Friday, a complete amateur. Many things come in and many things leave dead in the compost bin, but some things do work and it might help you in your orchid journey. And that orchid journey today, plant lovers, yes, ta-da, 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 I may have been shopping. Because it was the Autumn Orchid Species Society of Victoria annual plant sale, which is kind of like Christmas because it's amazing. They had them twice a year, autumn, spring, and the day before was a rare plant fair in Ferny Creek in Melbourne. I'll put all these links below for you. Generally, rare plant fairs don't have orchid dealers, but there was two people that sell orchids. One is an orchid specialist and one is a bulb and perennial specialist who has some terrestrial orchids. Anyway, we'll get to those one by one as we get through all this list of plants. But so today, plant lovers, it is my autumn orchid haul video because I have bought quite a few. So shall we just start at the very beginning, as Dame Julie Andrews said? Yes, where should we start? You know what? I know a very good place to start, which is this little baby here. So this, sold, as you can see, is an unprepossessing little stick, as you can see, but it is, ooh, the roots are stuck to the label. That's no good. It is a Dendrobium victoriae-reginae. Now, it is not the same form that I have, which cunningly, because I was just making a video about what's in bloom, and there's my Dendrobium victoriae-reginae blue bouquet. So that's the form, and this is just Dendrobium victoriae-reginae. So the aim of the game is that this should have flowers that are different to that. And let me put this beautiful flowering specimen back. Dendrobium victoriae-reginae is actually quite hard to come by. You don't sort of see it that often. So I saw this little one and thought, you know what? I don't need it because I have that fabulous flowering one, but it's so easy to grow here in Melbourne. I literally can just hang it up and leave it. So I'm just curious to see if I can get a different flower. Anyway, so this is the first cab off the rank, joining the family, Dendrobium victoriae-reginae. Okay, next cab off the rank. There is a logic to many of these things. There is also not any logic to many of them, but look at this. Now there's a keiki here. I wonder what that keiki is from. A dendrobium of sorts, I think. Anyway, look at that. Look at that. Vanda falcata. Now look at the size of it though, compared to my hand. It's a really beautiful, large, flowering size plant. Impossible to find. I have got the tiniest little sliver of a thing, which I've had for years, and it just does nothing. Maybe because it's in sphagnum and this is in small bark. But I had said to myself, you know what I really want? What I really, really want, as the Spice Girls said, I want a flowering size Vanda falcata, and there it was. So this wasn't inexpensive because they are slow growers. So this is years old, this plant. It's a mature one. It's in the little perforated plastic Vanda basket, which, as you know, I am going to change up for a drilled terracotta pot, but it's in bark, which is interesting. What I might even do when I repot this is just put my other silly little one in the same pot and they can struggle on together. And maybe the small one will get some loving growing energy from this. But isn't that the most beautiful sized plant? And there's just a picture of the flower. As you know, Vanda falcata is that very small, white, very fragrant flower. This particular Vanda comes from Eastern China, Korea, and Japan. So it can certainly take cooler temperatures. So slightly different growing conditions to your average Vanda. Definitely a cool grower, can be outside all year for me. So I am so looking forward to trying to get this baby to bloom. So very excited about that, which logically leads us on to the next plant, which is this little baby here, which is a Vanda, and it's a hybrid called Peaches. You can see it was $25. So it is this, obviously this, is that peach? Maybe it is. Peach colored, beautiful plant. Now, that's a seedling. Yeah, it's the same kind of growth habit as the Vanda falcata. This is a hybrid between Vanda falcata and Vanda curvifolia, which is a warmer grower that sort of grows along the Malay Peninsula. So Laos, southern China, Myanmar, Thailand, around that kind of area of Southeast Asia. But although it's a warmer grower and it's crossed with a cooler grower, this does very well in Melbourne outside all year. It can take our winter minimums because, plant lovers, I've seen it. I was talking at, what was I talking at? It was an orchid group about a month or so ago, and there was a show bench and someone had Vanda Peaches in bloom, and it was the most incredible thing. Just a mound of these beautiful peachy, orangey flowers, stunning. And I thought to myself, I need to find that. And ta-da, there it was. Now, this was at the Ferny Creek Rare Plant Fair at an orchid grower called Orchids on Newbold, and I'll put the list below, which is a great grower for me because he grows in country Victoria in very similar conditions to me, except it's colder, and he grows undercover with no heat, so the same as me, but gets colder winter minimums. So if he can grow it, I certainly can. So I'm thrilled to find one. Not that easy, not that common a plant to find. Anyway, Vanda Peaches, very, very excited to see what that brings to the table. Next, a little bag of joy. Look at that, a little bag of trimmings, I suppose we could call it, from Coelogyne fimbriata, and this is Alba, the white form. Now, this is a very rambly Coelogyne. I mean, all of the Coelogynes tend to be very rhizomy, but this particularly so. So not such a big rhizome in leaf as others, but really forms quite a tight mass. And the Alba form is supposed to be quite beautiful. I don't have this at all, actually, so there you go. It's a first for me. And look, $10 for all of that bag of, what are we going to call them? Clipping. It's not really division, is it really? It's a clipping. Anyway, cuttings, perhaps. Look at that. Divine. Now, later on, and I'm going to make a video about it, I'm going to repot two of my stanhopers because they're in Vanda baskets and I feel the space between the slats is not big enough to allow flower spikes to come out. So I'm going to repot this afternoon and I'm going to put this in one of those Vanda baskets because it will be perfect tangling around. You just let it form a mass and it's going to be covered in beautiful white flowers. So Coelogyne fimbriata alba, welcome to the family. And then talking of sort of tumbling things that I'm going to put in the Vanda basket, there are two stanhopers that I'm going to repot. So I'm going to have two Vanda baskets vacant, and this is going in one of them. It's an odd thing, not that flashy. Mediocalcar decoratum, there we go. And this is a New Guinea high altitude, cool growing orchid. So New Guinea has obviously very steep, incredible mountain ranges, and they're cloud forests, so perpetually covered in beautiful mist. So relatively warm, relatively bright sun, but lots of cloud cover. So the cloud actually acts as sort of like net curtains protecting the plants from the sun. So a constantly moist environment. And if you look at this, actually the leaves and the stems almost look quite succulent-like, don't they? Like Zembryanthrums or something. Anyway, it's a tumbler. It loves Melbourne. It doesn't like super hot weather, so hopefully it's going to be fine in weather like today. It's incredibly hot at the moment. It's autumn here in Melbourne, but it's hot as summer. Very, very unusual to be so blue sky, hot and tropical. Anyway, this hopefully will love life. And once again, I'm going to put it in one of those Vanda baskets in loose bark and just let it form a mass, and it gets covered in tiny, bright orange flowers, which are quite small, but it's covered in them. So it becomes this sort of massive, like little gobstoppers, I suppose, little jaffas. Anyway, I'm curious to see what that might bring to the world. Mediocalcar decoratum, welcome, welcome, welcome. And then finishing or continuing on this tray, I made some videos a while ago with Michael Coker. He is a great orchid grower here. He's the president of the Orchid Council here in Victoria and judges orchid shows and is an amazing font of knowledge and has the most incredible series of shade houses and greenhouses where he grows all manner of orchids brilliantly. I'm very grateful to be able to tap into his knowledge. And I made two videos with him. One was about deflasking and one was about, what was the other one about? And one was about growing phragmipediums. Anyway, I'm always thrilled that Michael has a stand at the Orchid Species Society of Victoria orchid sale because he always has amazing things that you don't find. And this is one of them. So this is Gastrorchis humblottii crossed with Françoisii, so it's a primary hybrid. There you go. So this is a terrestrial orchid, and perhaps it looks a lot like Calanthes in terms of how it grows. So you've got a sort of a pseudo-bulb and these leaves. Terrestrial orchid, but not deciduous. It sort of slows down and gets a bit unhappy in winter, but doesn't die down completely, according to Michael. It's in a terrestrial mix, which is more of a granular potting mix, really. So almost regular potting mix with perlite, perhaps, which is what Michael's used, I think. And actually, just checking Q, it actually is now classified as a Calanthe. So there you go. You can see it's certainly got that same sort of growth habit. So it's from Madagascar, which would suggest it's a warm lover, but it's from quite high altitude. So it's a cool grower, which should be perfect for me. It grows in fairly described as semi-deciduous forest. So it's going to get quite brightish dappled light, I guess, although it is a terrestrial, so it's a forest floor grower. I think it's not a deep shade lover. It's going to get some lovely dappled light. Anyway, the flowers are amazing. Google it. Now, I can't drop in photographs that aren't mine because of copyright issues, so you are going to have to Google all of these to have a look at the flowers, but Google it. Gastrorchis, I think that's how you pronounce it, or Gastrorchis humblottii, crossed with Françoisii. Nonetheless, just look at them. The flowers are stunning and I can't wait. Now, Michael thinks this could be flowering size next year, so we've got a new growth coming here. So obviously, I presume the more bulbs you get, the more chance you are going to get to have multiple flower spikes. So very much looking forward to this blooming and loving life in my conditions. Okay, next cab off the rank, again from Michael, is this, and it is a, Trichocentrum lanceanum. There you are, stunning. So this is pretty widespread across the top of South America. Again, varying altitude, so it's described as a cool grower, so it can take those weather conditions, cooler winter minimums. Looks a little sort of phalaenopsis-like, doesn't it? But the flower, have a look. It's like if a zygopetalum and a Vanda had a love child, that's what it would look like. Stunning flower. Never seen it before. Should do well with my climate. So there we are. It's got a new growth just coming up there. Who knows? Might be a year or two away from flowering, but an unusual thing. Should do well for me. Never seen it before. Very happy. And next up, once again from Michael, is Trichopilia tortilis. Now, there are some cooler growing ones of these, and I actually killed one, which is why I saw Trichopilia and thought, oh, great, I'm going to buy another one. It's the same one. Ha, ha. This one, I've stupidly discovered, is a warm hot grower. It's from much lower elevations, although it does get to quite high elevations, but it's a Central American orchid, so it just likes warmer weather. The reason I love these is that the flowers are incredible, and the cooler growing ones from higher altitudes are stunning. Anyway, so this was a little foolish. This was because I didn't read the small print well enough to discover this is actually a warm hot grower. So it's going to have to be inside. Not sure. We'll have to see how it's going to thrive for me inside. But anyway, well worth it because the flowers are stunning. I'm not quite sure where we're at size-wise. I don't have a sense of the scale of these orchids, but I would imagine that could be getting close-ish to flowering size. Who knows? But when they do flower, amazing looking plants. So let's hope this one loves life at the top of the stairs in bright light in warm conditions all year. And next up is Laelia. Now I've got a lot of Laelias and they're all in spike actually at the moment. This is Laelia superbiens and it's Alba. So it's the white form. Now, one of the synonyms for this plant is Schomburgkia, and they have those enormous long spikes with the clusters of flowers at the top. So I'm curious, look at the size of that plant. I mean, it's relatively mature-ish. I mean, yeah, I think that's doing very well. It doesn't have any signs of having flowered, so it might still be juvenile. But I'm just wondering, quite what the form of this flower is going to be. Anyway, Laelias do really well in Melbourne. They can take our cool winter minimum, so this will be outdoors all year. And hopefully it's going to give me amazing white flowers. So I'm very much looking forward to this taking off. And I can just see, just at the base in there, that little green point, there's a new growth coming out. So it's clearly starting to ramp up. And I can see new roots too. So it might actually be a good time to repot this one. Anyway, Laelia, superbiens, the Alba form. Looking forward to seeing what that actually looks like. All right, next up is this. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. There's even a picture of the flower, and it is a Jumellea comorensis. There we are. And this grows from, strange enough, comorensis from the Comore Islands, just to the west of Madagascar. So there are lots of Madagascan relatives of this, but this obviously was isolated for a long time. Now look at the form of it. So it creates sort of a tangled mass, and it's almost described, well, is described as a subshrub. So there you go, quite a large tangly thing, but it can take cooler temperatures. I'm curious. It has very Angræacum type white flowers, which are fragrant, which last a long time. So who knows? It does like a dry out winter, which is fine, but this is going to be outside all year. So we'll see how I go with this. Really intrigued. Now I do have Jumellea arachnantha, which is from Madagascar, which has a completely different habit to this, but very similar flowers. So honestly, if you saw them next to each other, you wouldn't think they're related, but apparently they are. So I'm intrigued to see how this baby does in my conditions. Anyway, there we go. Jumellea comorensis should, apparently, it's one of the easiest of this group of orchids to grow and flower. We'll be a judge of that. Next up, and this again was from Orchids on New Bowls, so this was the previous day's plant sale. This is an Australian native Dendrobium called falcorostrum, which I have mentioned before in some of my Aussie Dendrobium videos because it's one of the species types that's used to create many a hybrid. Look at that beautiful plant. Interestingly, this one comes from higher altitude, so it does actually like cooler conditions. Otherwise, pretty similar in terms of its light requirements, particularly in winter. Obviously, they grow in eucalypt forests, which are evergreen, but the sun is lower in winter and penetrates more, generally dappled light all year, and the flowers are initiated in winter and bloom in late winter or spring. This one has done very well. These are obviously two new growths here, so each successive cycle the plant's getting bigger, as you can see. Seedling, sort of juvenile, then it's starting to get big. It's not as massive as Dendrobium speciosum, but a very beautiful plant. So just like slightly cooler temperatures. So for those of you in North America or Britain, Dendrobium falcorostrum might be a great one for you, as long as you can give it the sunlight it needs in winter. But I am very much looking forward to seeing, and I don't see why it shouldn't, that this could even flower for me this season. So we will keep our eye on that. I've never seen it for sale before. Very happy. Next up, another Dendrobium, a Himalayan Dendrobium, which we live for because they like Melbourne's conditions. Look at this, fabulous plant. Look at all those new growths, some established growths here, and there is a picture of the flower for you because this is Dendrobium fimbriatum. There you go. And it has the most beautiful golden yellow flowers. So yes, Himalayan Dendrobium, like many of them, it wants a dry winter and plenty of light to stimulate those flower buds. And just looking at some of these older spikes, I'm not seeing that there are any indications that it has actually flowered in the past. But I would say, looking at the size of it, that is very much a flowering size plant, don't you think? Repotting wise, you would want to do this in spring when it's starting to produce its new growth. Not a good time to repot them now because it's just going kind of into stasis over winter and you're just going to get the roots doing nothing and being in wet medium. So not going to repot this immediately, but I'm going to give it lots of sun, take out that little stick and hopefully see it bloom. But a really beautiful established plant, Dendrobium fimbriatum, and I'm very happy to have this because I've had a bit of a success recently with those Himalayan Dendrobiums, which I have failed with in the past. They can rot quite easily if you don't get the moisture right, those new growths in winter. So you've got to kind of keep that dry and yet moist balance quite right, because sometimes you can just get it wrong and they'll rot. Next up, a Cattleya, which is not a Cattleya anymore. It is now a Guarianthe and it is skinneri. We'll call it Cattleya skinneri though for you, but it is the Alba form, white. So, always interested to get cooler growing species Cattleya, or Guarianthe in this case, but you know what I mean, we'll call it Cattleya. because it's just easier for me to grow them outside all year under cover. Now, this is a division by the looks of it, and we've got a new growth here and canes that look to me as though they would be capable of flowering. Anyway, a very beautiful orchid, but beautiful to see it in the white form, so it's usually pink. Anyway, very excited to see that. I always long to get mature sized, flowering sized Cattleya divisions because they're hard to come by. All right, and then another little terrestrial. So this came from Jane Tonkin. Now, I made a video with Jane about growing peonies. So she's more of a bulb and perennial specialist, but she does have peonies, but she also has terrestrial bulb sort of orchids. And this one is Serapias lingua, which is a Mediterranean terrestrial orchid. Not that uncommon, but look, it's just starting to shoot because it's autumn and it's just beginning to do its work. I think very common to find in Europe, North America, but not so common to find here anyway. And basically you just treat this as a herbaceous perennial. So I'm just going to go and pop this out in some dappled light, let it do its business, and then dry out-ish reasonably. Bit of a dormancy over summer. Obviously it dies down, but don't want to desiccate it, and then perhaps repot with more fertilizer in early autumn or late summer, in fact, because you can see it's early autumn and it's starting to put its growth on. So probably repot it at the same time you would other spring flowering bulbs. But look at that, most beautiful flower. So I'm very excited about that. Serapias lingua, a beautiful pink flowered terrestrial from the Mediterranean. And then we have, but wait, there's more, a Cymbidium. And this is a species, it is Cymbidium dayanum. There you go, you can maybe just make out that label, Cymbidium dayanum. It's a species orchid and it has beautiful, very fine, slightly pendulous flowers, which are sort of whitey ivory with a streak of red down the middle. Really, really beautiful, quite small, elegant thing. And not that common to find here anyway. And this is probably someone's division. And you can see there's a new growth coming up here and two mature bulbs here. And I wonder if they have flowered. I can't see any trace of a spike, which means they could perhaps be the new bulbs that might well flower. Who knows? Cymbidiums can sulk a little bit if they've been divided, and there's actually a lot of this material is dead, I have to say. So we'll wait and see what happens next spring, but this is probably going to be good for a repot and trimming off some of these dead and quite desiccated back bulbs. Anyway, Cymbidium dayanum, species orchid. And growing some of the species Cymbidiums with your hybrid Cymbidiums is great because often they have a slightly different flowering time, so you can expand your Cymbidium flowering period by getting a few species into the mix. This one is very elegant. And then lastly, plant lovers, because I mean, why not? Some Pleurothallis. Now, these are cool growers and they love Melbourne as long as you do keep them cool. And in very hot weather, when they are about to flower, which that one might well be, if there is an unusually hot spell when they're blooming, it can spell disaster. And I have had flowers just wither on the plant because it suddenly got very hot. So they don't love the heat, but they are one of those high altitude cloud forest groups of plants that can do very well in Melbourne as long as they're shady and moist and kept moist and humid on particularly hot, sultry days like today. And this one is, well, the tag says Pleurothallis Insigne. There you go. But as happened with many orchids, it has been renamed Pleurothallis macrophylla, large leaves. Anyway, this is a Colombian species, high altitude, quite typical flowers of Pleurothallis, which is a spike with sort of little bells, and this is a sort of a dark mahogany brown colored flower. Anyway, it's been used to create a few hybrids, but what a handsome plant that is. So very excited to have this. And Pleurothallis do quite well for me and flower quite easily. Once you get the right spot with the right amount of indirect light and moisture, they just love it. So because this stall holder had a lot of Pleurothallis, I was madly Googling them all to see what's the prettiest flower. And this one is Pleurothallis Insigne. There you go, look at that. Let me just show you the label, there you go. Now, Insigne doesn't exist, unfortunately, as a Pleurothallis name, but I think this is Pleurothallis glossopogon, and it has an amazing, quite large flower, sort of unlike the others. It's quite open, quite white, and again with pink in it. So Insigne means sort of beautiful, strident, beautiful flower, which kind of makes sense looking at the actual flower. But anyway, we'll just have to see what this actually is when it blooms. But what a beautiful, healthy, fabulous looking plant that is. From the same part of the world, sort of Colombia, Venezuela, that sort of the top part of South America where these grow at high altitude. And then the last Pleurothallis, which of course is now not a Pleurothallis any longer, is Endotrachus, and it's a form called Lil. Now this is now Specklinia Endotrachus, and it has the most beautiful, quite open orange flowers. So bright orange is not that common. I've got a couple of orange flowering orchids. So on Googling this one, just the image of it looked amazing. So this is from Costa Rica, again, high altitude, cool growing. So should love life where the other Pleurothallis are. And as you can see, it actually looks a lot more Masdevallia-ish, doesn't it? Anyway, looking forward to this bursting forth with its orange blooms. And so, plant lovers, that is my Confessions of an Orchid Shopaholic 101. Look, we just have so many wonderful things. I'm going to spend the next couple of weeks just figuring out where everything goes. So a few of these I'm going to repot right now because I'm doing something else that can accommodate them. And the rest, I've just got to find out what to do. I think our little Dendrobium victoriae-reginae I can repot right now because that essentially grows all the time. And I know how these grow and thrive for me. So I'm going to give that one a little bit of love right now. Anyway, plant lovers, the moral of this story is join your local orchid club because that is the best way to meet people and to find amazing orchids like these that you perhaps couldn't find from regular growers online or other suppliers. And the other great thing is, which is what I was able to do with all of these, is ask the grower how they grow it and convince myself that I can. So all of these were grown by people who don't have heated greenhouses. So the same conditions as me, basically. And some of the orchids aren't described as cool growers. So having met the person that grows it, you know, although the literature might say it won't love my conditions, I know from an experienced grower that it will. And that is the wonderful thing about talking to people in your area that grow orchids as well, just to find out what thrives for you and what boundaries can be pushed in terms of your zonal denial to enable things to thrive that you might not thought of and you may have dismissed as saying, I can never grow that because it's too hard or it likes warm weather or cold weather or whatever it might be. You could be surprised. So join your local orchid club. Now, I'll put the list below of the Orchid Species Society of Victoria, but also the overarching organisation in Victoria that lists all the clubs. Now, in every state in Australia, there should be a similar organisation which will list all the clubs and the days that they meet of the month. And all of those clubs will have at every meeting, usually tables where people swap and sell orchids, and usually maybe once or twice a year, a big sale where people are selling their plants. So that is a great reason to join. And then wherever you are in the world, I'm pretty sure, so in North America and in Europe and in South Africa, where I have a lot of viewers, in New Zealand, I'm quite sure there's going to be orchid societies there as well. In fact, I have a lot of viewers in India too. And I am quite sure there are orchid societies there. So particularly those amazing Himalayan orchids that grow in the north of India. Anyway, as I said, quite simply, Google orchid clubs near me and see what pops up and do a little working around, and you'll find hopefully somewhere that you can go and meet other people, find great plants and learn about the orchids that thrive in your neck of the woods. And the other thing, as I got a few of these plants from a rare plant fair, just have a look at rare plant fairs too around you if there are any, and just have a look at who the exhibitors are and just see if any of them might do terrestrial orchids, or you might even have an orchid specialist there as well. So they are well worth investigating as well. So there we are, plant lovers. Here is my stash. I'll be curious to see how many are alive in a year. I have a good feeling though. As the years progress, I am coming to understand more and more what works for me and what doesn't. So I do tend not to make silly risks, although this Trichopilia tortilis is probably silly because I just didn't Google it properly, and it is a warm grower anyway. Generally, I don't make that many mistakes anymore with what I can buy. Of course, I make lots of mistakes with actually growing them and kill many, which is kind of my joke, is that all these have come out, but as many have gone in the compost bin this year. So I hope wherever you are, you're inspired, and I hope your orchids are doing well and you have found some good suppliers and maybe a good club, and you're learning more and more about what thrives for you. I know what can thrive for me, and I also know that I might be sharing some of those things next week. So you'll have to hit subscribe if you want to know what I'm doing next week. I post every Friday, very amateur ramblings. Many things don't make it because they don't survive or they don't flower, but I do look forward to seeing you next week.